Click the bell icon to get latest videos from Ekeeda.
Hello friends, we'll be discussing the nature of receipts and payments account that we have in place right now. So when we speak about receipts and payments account, there are certain terminologies or certain basic things that need to understand, or rather that you need to understand when it comes to this specific account. So basically when it comes to not-for-profit organization, we deal with two kinds of accounts. One, that is receipt and payment account. Second, that can be income and expenditure account. So whenever you have to deal with these kind of accounts, you need to understand what exactly you need to put in and what are the details that you need to take care of. So make sure that all these details that we are jotting down here, or rather which we have already mentioned down here, you frame these things, or rather you put them in your own words, but these pointers are supposed to be a part of this specific topic. So whenever this topic is supposed to be explained, these points, or rather these points, are or have to be included in your answer. So let's get on with the first point now. Now, receipts and payments account is basically a summary of cash book without the date column. I'm reiterating this topic. Receipts and payments is a summary of cash book itself without the date column. Just like the cash book, when you have single column, double column and triple column cash book, where you have cash, bank and discount column as well. If you remove the date column out of it, that becomes your receipts and payment account. So basically receipts are mentioned on the debit side and payments are mentioned on the credit side. So if I've explained you cash book earlier, when it comes to bank reconciliation statement, or when it comes to any kind of books of accounts where we have discussed earlier, cash book has all the receipts, or rather all the additions, or if I can say that any amount that increases your bank balance is mentioned on the debit side. Similarly, in receipts, anything that increases your balance is mentioned on the debit side. Now, just like in cash book, anything that reduces your balance is mentioned on the credit side. Similar way, in receipts and payments, you understand that if there is any payment or that is reducing your balance or bank balance, it is mentioned on the credit side. Hence, receipts and payment is equivalent to cash book without the date column here. You just have to remove the date column because date column isn't a necessary part in receipts and payment. However, it is necessary in cash book there. So in this specific period, or in this specific chapter, we'll be understanding the details of receipts and payment right now. Now the second point, receipts, or rather the second point of this specific concept, speaks about the kind of receipts that we are supposed to be, or rather the kind of receipts that are admissible in this chapter. Now the point that is highlighted here states that all the receipts it may be of capital nature, it may be of revenue nature, is debited to the receipts and payment account, and all the expenses are, it may be like capital or revenue nature. Again, it may be capital or revenue nature, it is transferred to the credit side of receipts and payment account. So whatever income you have, whatever receipts you have, it may be a capital receipt, that is a one-time receipt, or it may be a revenue receipt, that means it occurs every time, every month, every interval. So it may be any kind of this receipt, it is debited to the receipts and payment account. And similar way, all the payments, capital or revenue, it is credited to the receipts and payments account. So this is what they have mentioned here. Now wherever the opening, or rather whenever this account is supposed to be prepared, the opening balance is the opening cash or bank balance. Either the cash balance or bank balance is taken as the opening here, and the closing is also referred to the closing of the cash and bank balance. So whatever opening balance you have in cash is taken as the opening balance of receipt and payments account. Whatever closing balance you have in cash is taken as the closing of receipts and payment account. So it can be either cash balance or bank balance, whichever it is, as per the discretion of the question, it will be taken into picture. Now, this payment account is not a part of double entry system. Like in double entry system, what we have understood, every transaction has a dual effect. That means every debit has a similar credit. Every credit has a similar debit or something like that. This isn't a part of this specific chapter. Hence, receipts and payment account don't fall under the category of double entry bookkeeping system here. Now, when we speak about the receipts and payments, maybe of current nature, or rather we can talk about the capital nature or revenue nature, any receipt, be it of capital or revenue nature, any payment, be it of capital or revenue nature, for all the time period, that means current, past and future, everything is recorded under the receipts of, or rather receipts and payments account. So it doesn't say that only this year's transaction will be recorded. Any current year transaction will be also recorded. Any previous year transaction that we have received in the current year will be also recorded. And any payment that we're making for the future year will be also recorded in this specific account for the current year. So it includes for all time frame. Now, the last point that we have to discuss before we can go on to the example is that in this specific chapter, you need to understand that the surplus or deficit, that means excess of expenditure over income or excess of income over deficit or rather expenditure. Now, expense of or rather excess of expenditure over income will give you deficit. Excess of income over expenditure will give you surplus. Now, this specific concept won't give you the exact position of the company or rather the exact cash position because non-cash items are completely excluded from this transaction. So basically, surplus and deficit cannot be ascertained on the basis of receipts and payments account. It can be ascertained on the basis of incomes and expenditure because it includes both cash and non-cash expenditure. However, in receipts and payments, we take care of only cash expenditure, non-cash expenditure like depreciation or like patents or any other thing where the money is not going out. It may be reserves, it may be any other thing where the money is not actually going out. In such scenarios, those expenses are not even considered in receipts and payments. The only item that is considered here is the cash expenditure and cash income. Only those items are supposed to be considered here. Now, let's go on to the next phase of it. Now, to give you more detail on this, or rather to justify how exactly it is supposed to be done, what are the things that are supposed to be considered, we have jotted down an example here for your reference. Let's read out that example and see what do we have there for you. Now, in this example, we have the receipts and payment of S class, and that is for 31st of March 2016. They have mentioned certain expenses and certain payments, or rather, we can talk about certain incomes, that is receipts, and certain expenses that may be payments. So let's read out each and every receipt and payment here. So on 31st of March 2016, entrance fees that were received were 300 rupees. Membership fees amounted to 3000 rupees. Donation amounted to 10,000. Food stuff sale amounted to rupees 1200. Salary and wages amounted to again 1200 rupees. Purchase of foodstuff amounted to rupees 800. Construction of club amounted to rupees 11,000 here. General expenses amounted to 600. Rent and taxes were 400. Bank charges were 160. We have been also given the cash in hand and cash at bank. The cash in hand is known as cash balance. The cash at bank is known as bank balance. So the opening cash balance and opening bank balance has been given as of 1st of April. Cash balance was 200, bank balance was 400. The closing cash balance and bank balance as of 31st March is also provided. Cash balance was 350 and bank balance was 509. So we are required to prepare here receipts and payments account. So this is the requirement of the question. Let's go on to the format that we have already prepared. So we have prepared the receipts and payments account here. So receipt is on the debit side, payment is on the credit side. Now this is for S Club as of 31st of March. This refers to the receipts and payments account. So whatever items we have mentioned earlier, we'll start placing those items in the receipt column and the payment column according to the standard of it. So whenever we start with the opening balance, rather whenever we start with receipts and payments account, we need to use the opening cash balance or bank balance, whatever has been given here. Let's mention that here. So opening balance has been mentioned here. We'll mention cash and bank both. So cash balance 200 and bank balance 400 has been mentioned down here. Let's go on to the next item that is supposed to be a part of receipts here. So the next item that is supposed to be a part here is the entrance fees, that is rupees 300. That will be a part of this specific transaction. Next will be the membership fee. So membership fees of 3000 is also a part of this specific question because this is a receipt for us. So anyone who's approaching our club and pays the entrance fees or the membership fees, that is an income for us, or rather that is a receipt for us, and hence we are mentioning that on the receipt side here. The next amount that is mentioned here is the donation. So whatever amount we have received as a part of grants, donation, everything is a receipt, and hence this 10,000 amount that we have learned in the question is also coming on the receipt side here. Now that we have mentioned all the receipts here, the next phase that we have to mention here is the payments that are supposed to be a part of this specific illustration. Now when it comes to payment, all the expenses are supposed to be considered. The first expenses that we're considering is the salary and wages. So salary and wages of 1200 have been mentioned on the credit side here. The next amount that we have mentioned is the purchase of foodstuff, 800 has been mentioned there. The next payment where we made is construction of club amount, 11,000 rupees have been spent. That amount has been mentioned here, and that is a payment, hence it has been mentioned on the payment side. So the next few item that we have mentioned here is the general expenses 600 rupees, by rent and taxes 400 rupees, and by certain amount of 160 that was mentioned here, which refers to bank charges. So this specific bank charge has been mentioned here. Now if you see, we have mentioned all the receipts, all the payments, opening balance has been mentioned. Now it's turn to mention the closing balance, that will be mentioned on the credit side, and then we'll see if the receipts are equal to the payments or not. But before we could go ahead and close this thing, let's figure out what is the debit balance here and what is the credit balance. Ideally, the closing cash and bank balance should be equivalent to the amount of transaction that we have there. So let's made it out, or rather let's mention this thing, because whenever we prepare the actual receipts and payment account, this closing balance has to be mentioned there in a specific format, because you have to prepare the cash account and then bank account and then figure out every balance accordingly, and then you have to mention it here. So now that they've already given this thing, let's mention that thing here itself. So the receipts amount is 15,100. This should be equivalent to the payments amount here, because that's when the closing balance has been already given to us. So this is how the receipts and payment account is supposed to be prepared. Rather, this is just a basic gist of what items are supposed to be considered as the receipt part and what items are supposed to be considered as a payment part. And similarly, we have updated the balance as well, which is equivalent. That is, receipts balance is 15,100, similar to the payments balance, which is 15,100 again. So these are the details that we need to mention in here, and nothing else has to be mentioned, except when it comes to actual preparation of receipts and payment account, we have to go ahead and prepare the cash balance and bank balance as well, so as to underestimate or rather figure out what is the estimate of cash closing balance and bank closing balance, and accordingly that has to be mentioned down there. So this is what we had to explain when it comes to nature of receipts and payments account. So thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.